So I'll call to order the special meeting to discuss the bicycle pedestrian trail connectivity feasibility study. All councilors are present, and for everybody that's on video, we can barely see you because we have the presentation up. So if you have any questions, just jump in because we can't really see you to acknowledge you. And with that, I am going to turn this over to Jana Richards.
Good evening, counselors. Thanks for taking the time to be at this workshop. We thought it would be better to have a separate workshop than to bring this.
Yeah, almost like.
Sorry?
Yeah.
That's just.
To have this be a separate workshop rather than at a council meeting, so we can have more discussion on it and sort of have more of an explanation of the study and the study process so far. So we put together a hopefully brief presentation to outline the study and then open it up for discussion. It's pretty informal, so feel free to chat during the presentation. I'll give you some background information on the study, and then Lisa's going to go through the alternatives. There's alternatives from Birch Avenue to Main Street. Then there's some alternatives from Main Street to the Sunrise Trail, and then one alternative for the pedestrian crossing, which would be at Merrill Lane crossing High Street. We'll go into talking about some of the estimated costs for the different alternatives for the trail connection, talk about some potential next steps, and then leave it open for open discussion. Next slide. Oh boy. So while she's figuring out the technicalities of switching the slide, for the background information, the purpose was to evaluate the feasibility of connecting the terminus of the Ellsworth Rail Trail or Bike Ped Trail, which the terminus is at Birch Avenue, with the terminus of the Sunrise Trail around the intersection of Beals Ave and High Street. It's about 3/4 of a mile section in between. Just as like a little bit of background information, we went after a Maine DOT PPI Planning Partnership Initiative grant to help fund this study. The council approved that grant in January of 2020. And after we got approval, we went forward and issued an RFP for a engineering firm to help us with the study. We selected VHB. I believe Tony Grande from VHB is on the call right now if we have any technical questions for him. And we approved him to lead the study in May of 2020. Next slide. So just wanted to show this slide to give a better idea of the study area. So if you can see all the way to the left of the screen where there's an A in green, that would be Birch Avenue and the terminus of the Bike Ped Trail. And then if you look all the way down, is that a B? In green is the terminus of the Sunrise Trail on the right of your screen. And then C is where that pedestrian crossing is at Merrill Lane, where there's the light at like Key Bank that goes into the Ellsworth Shopping Plaza. This is just a timeline of events that have happened since we applied and received the Maine DOT PPI grant in the fall and winter of 2019. Spring of 2020, we issued the RFP and selected the consultant. Again, it was VHB. At that time, we also established a technical advisory committee. So we had city staff, city councilors, DOT, people from the DOT and their planning and their rail divisions, as well as some residents that live within the study area. And then we had a woman who is from the East Coast Greenway, which is the Sunrise Trail and this trail are all part of the East Coast Greenway. So she was part of the committee as well. In the summer of 2020, we had our first public meeting. The impetus behind that meeting was to collect any issues and concerns from residents of Ellsworth in order to develop the different alternatives. And the consultant took the information that he received during that public meeting, as well as any information from the Technical Advisory Committee, to start developing those different alternatives. Just this fall, we got a draft of the feasibility study. The Technical Advisory Committee met to review the draft and provide any information or feedback on that. There was another public meeting where there was a review of the draft study and, again, to get any feedback from the public, and any of that was incorporated into the final feasibility study, which is what we emailed to the counselors. And here we are tonight at the council workshop to review these alternatives and discuss next steps. So that sets us up to look at some of the alternatives. Lisa's going to go through them for us.
Okay, I'm gonna try to keep it, oh, good evening, Lisa Seckledge, for those who don't know me. Try to keep it brief, because there are a multitude of different options that were looked at during this process. Hang on, let me do my multiple roles here. So there was basically 4 sections of this that we looked at. The first section would be from Birch Avenue to Park Street. Then the next section would be Park Street to Church Street, then Church Street to Main Street, and then Main Street to Sunrise Trail. The first 3 sections, from Birch Avenue to Main Street, the first alternative, we looked at various alternatives, and what those alternatives basically were looking at the railroad track and looking at, okay, do we go above the railroad tracks? Do we go below the railroad tracks, essentially? Do we go along Spring Street, or do we improve Spring Street? And so those are kind of just the general, different alternatives we looked at along that section, but I'll go through them in each little actual section. So Birch Avenue to Park. Alternatives 1 and 2 are both along Spring Street. Alternative 1 for this and the next 2 sections were basically looking at using Spring Street with just minimal work. So that would be some signage, a little bit of pavement preservation, and possibly some different stripings, and essentially just using Spring Street with cars on it, but kind of allowing pedestrians and bikes to also use the road. That was not our ideal alternative. So the second alternative for this section was to do more improvements to the roadway, but still do a shared roadway type option. Again, not loving the idea of pedestrians and cars being on the same road or same path. We looked at then option 3 for this section, which instead of using Spring Street, which there are driveways currently that go onto that section of Spring Street, so we decided to look at, okay, if we go above the railroad tracks here and basically in line with the existing path already at Birch Avenue, stay on the same side of the tracks, and we use the top side of the tracks to go from Birch all the way to Park Street. That is our preferred alternative at this point. The next section.
Lisa, just a question. When you get to the cost, is it broken down by section?
It is.
So we'll be able to look at
Each section, yep.
So,
Yep.
can I just tell them about the packet? The packet in front of you has the appendices here, the conceptual estimates. So it says Birch Street to Park, Park to Church, Church to Main, and then Main to Sunrise. So they're all right there.
And then it's got all the different alternatives that I'm
Yep.
going through on that first sheet.
Yep.
Color coded. Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, so Park Street to Church Street, alternatives 1, 2, and 4, again, are all along Spring Street, or what I'm going to call the bottom side of the railroad tracks. Again, alternative 1 was basically just some signage and some minor work to Spring Street to keep cars and bikes and pedestrians on the street. Not our ideal circumstance. Alternative 2 was to do more improvements, but still again maintain cars and bikes and pedestrians on the same section of roadway. Alternative 3, which is not on here, but I will go to it. Hold on. Alternative 3 was to go on the high side or the top side of the railroad tracks. The issue with that is if you see right here at Lincoln Street, there is a house that is extremely close to the edge of the tracks, and putting a path on that side of the trail or of the rail would impede their driveway and their yard extensively. So option 3 is not our best option. And so we ended up going with alternative 4 as our preferred option. So you'll see on this slide that coming into Park Street, the path would be on the top side of the rail. You would cross Park Street and then jog down to Spring Street. Spring Street would be closed to vehicular traffic, and it would be converted into a shared use path for bikes and pedestrians only. There are no driveways on this section of Spring Street except for right on the corner of Park Street. And the people on the corner of Park Street already have a driveway onto Park Street, so they're not losing access to their house.
Are there any ridiculous requirements around the railroad track? Or can we just cross it? The fact that we're crossing.
There are concerns about the number of crossings that we have for pedestrian crossings, but where there's already essentially a road crossing there, it's not really, I don't think, an additional crossing. But that becomes more of a discussion as we get into the main to Downey's Sunrise Trail section. Okay, so that's the preferred alternative for that section. And then this third section here is a little more complicated, from Church Street to Main Street. There's actually 5 alternatives. Again, the first one is using Spring Street with some minor changes. Not ideal because you're still looking at having vehicular traffic on it. Again, alternative 2 is a little bit more construction on Spring Street, but still vehicles and pedestrians on the roadway. Again, not ideal. Alternative 3, gotta switch screens here, looks at going on the high side of the tracks. The problem with that is it goes into the area that Merrill Blueberry uses for their trucks.
Allen Blueberry.
Oh, I'm sorry, Allen Blueberry. It goes into their section of roadway there that they use for trucks and stuff for to get to their back refrigerators. And then alternative 4 and 5 are both a lot alike, but with some minor changes or some minor differences. The idea in these would be the 5 is going to ultimately be the recommended alternative, but both 4 and 5 have the section from the Church Street to the back side of the Emerson property where there's a driveway that uses Spring Street. That area becomes strictly a path for pedestrians and bicycles. And then from that red line here, or this driveway on the back of Emerson's, out to the road, it becomes a shared use path for bicycles, pedestrians, and the vehicles that need to use this little section to access either the blueberries or this property. The difference between alternative 4 and alternative 5 is alternative 4 basically leaves it along the existing Spring Street. Alternative 5, to get some additional space between the railroad and the path. Well, it's the road and the path simultaneously at this point. It kind of shifts the whole road over towards the Emerson property with a retaining wall to get some space between the tracks and the walking and driving part of the path/roadway. It just makes it safer to get a little bit of distance between the rail and either the walking or motoring public. So those are those first 3 sections. I'm going to kind of stop there.
If you go to the next one, it shows all the recommended,
Okay, so I forgot. We got one
just
more.
so you can, and that's what, oh, that's alternative 5, showing the
The
realignment.
realignment of the Spring Street and pushing it a little farther over towards Emerson's property here. So this is the look from Birch to Main. See, it's hard to see it on here.
Yeah.
There we go.
We have the
Like
board.
I said,
if
we
you
go
need to
up
see
here
it.
on the top side from Birch to Park, and then at Park you make the crossing and go along Spring Street, and stay along Spring Street as a path just for pedestrians and bicycles until you get to the Allen's Blueberry / Emerson property, to which that short section from the driveways to Main Street then becomes a multi-use section. So that's the first chunk of the project. You guys have any questions or anything you want to talk about that first section before I go into the next half?
Anyone have a question on video?
Seeing none. Okay, well then I'm just going to keep plugging along. Okay, so the next section is from Main Street to Sunrise Trail. This segment becomes a little more complicated, only in that there is more commercial businesses and options as to how we want to go with the path, because we don't have Spring Street essentially to use as a path. So the first alternative we looked at was coming off of Spring Street, turning on for crossing Main Street, going up the hill, and using Beals Ave as part of the path. This wouldn't be any sort of reconstruction of Beals Ave. It would just be some pavement markings, some signage, and sending people down Beals Ave walking or riding their bikes to get to the connection of the Sunrise Trail. While this serves the purpose we were looking at, it's not our ideal situation. So that was the first alternative we looked at.
Lisa, quick question, just in terms of crossing Spring Street across to Main Street.
Yep.
Is there a need for, there's not a crosswalk there
There's not.
now, is that the intent?
Yes, so the intent there would be crosswalk there, yes. I think the idea would be we would try to use one of those rapid flashing beacons,
Yep.
like we have out here by the
More center.
Moore Center, and doing that kind of thing for that crosswalk.
Thank you.
Again, technicalities, struggling. So alternative 2, again, crosses Main Street. You go up the hill here on Main Street, but then we go on the, I'm gonna call it the bank, on the top side of the main community foundation building. To do that option, you're looking at, because it's a bank, you're looking at retaining walls and some possible grade changes that are fairly significant. But the positive is the path stays on the high side of the train tracks until you get past Beals Avenue, in which you cross the tracks to get to the Sunrise Trail. Again, it serves a lot of the purposes, but not sure if it's our ideal. But the scenarios, there's actually 4 for this section. Scenarios 2, 3, and 4 are all potential alternatives that have varying costs and varying limitations and issues. And so the way the study was left is that all alternatives 2, 3, and 4 are going to be taken to the next level as far as they'll all be looked at in design. And then we'll get some more design elements and some more details in the next section or the next phase of this project to determine which really is the best alternative, both cost-wise and safety, as the railroad has some concerns about how many crossings we have and that kind of thing. So that's the first of our one potential alternative. Alternative 3, this is where we go and we stay on the downhill side of the main community foundation building here. And we cross the tracks at where the loading platform is from the Downey Scenic Railroad. Cross the tracks there, go on the high side of the track because there's plenty of right-of-way and a fairly level ground on this side. And you make that all the way to Beals Avenue, and then once you pass Beals Avenue, you would have to cross the tracks again to get over to the Sunrise Trail. So this one, you cross the tracks twice in this short section. Again, it's an option that we want to look at, but with, I think there's some concerns potentially about crossing the tracks twice in the short section. So again, it's something we want to look at further going forward. And then alternative 4, was actually an alternative that came to us at the very end of this project, and it came from the railroad, the Downey Scenic Railroad, and that alternative is for us to stay on the downhill side of Main Community Foundation the entire way so that we don't have to cross the tracks, but it would require that the Downey Scenic Railroad or the railroad relocate a section of track. So that would be, to do that would require some retaining walls on the High Street side of the trail because there's some dilapidated retaining walls at this point in time along that section. So we would have to do some reinforcement of some retaining walls and that kind of thing to put the path on this lower side of the track as you get closer to Beals Avenue there. But again, it's a potential alternative that we would like to look at going forward to see if it's feasible and if the costs and benefits are something that would work for us. All of these alternatives at some point, I don't know if I'm supposed to say this, but one of the things that we do have to look at on this is the crossing or Beals Avenue, ultimately what we want to do at that location with vehicular traffic also.
And with that proposal, I mean, that would essentially block that off, right? Is that what you're saying, suggesting? And
A lot of these proposals work better with Beals Avenue being closed to vehicular traffic because then
To through traffic, you
to
mean?
through traffic.
Yeah. I don't want the residents thinking, oh damn, what are they gonna do now?
No.
But that's the reason I just think, especially if anybody Beals Avenue's listening, it'd be important for them to weigh in and just to see what they think. And because we know people cut through, especially in the summer, that's used as a cutoff.
As a bypass,
and
yes.
And I think, not always safely. So it may be something that the neighborhood isn't that concerned about closing.
I don't think any of them necessitate it. They just work better with it. Some of the crossings, I think it's recommended. Oh, I went too far now.
Didn't we already do a study to ask the residents of Beals Avenue what they thought about that?
10 years ago, I
Yeah,
believe.
I was gonna say 20. It's been quite a while, Bob, since that was done. It's a lot of years.
I thought we did one recently since we started doing this project.
No, we came to council and asked council for their temperature on whether or not it was something that would potentially be feasible so that we knew going into the study, if it was a hard no that we were going to have to leave Beals open, it could have affected some of the potential alternatives. So. Alright, I think the next proposal, so this is the look at the recommended alternatives, kind of all in one big fall swoop here.
That's 2 and 3.
Right, that's 2 and 3, and then 4 with the relocated, track is on the next one here. And all of them have some challenges or things that would have to be looked at in the next phase. But nothing that we hopefully can't get by. The alternative for the pedestrian crossing is pretty basic. It's kind of a do or don't do. This is the recommended alternative, which is to replace the signal pole, replace and relocate the signal poles, as well as some pedestrian push buttons and crosswalks and ADA compliant ramps and tip downs. This is the,
Just, can you maybe explain what the situation is now, what people have to do? There's no crosswalks
There's no cross.
here now at this intersection at all?
correct.
They have to pray and run like hell.
Currently there's not a ADA compliant with push buttons and such signal at this location. The closest is either Main Street and High Street or down at Walgreens. So this would add a mid, I don't want to call it block because it's longer than a block, but a mid-section crossing.
That, and you better change it from Hannaford to Shaw's.
Yeah,
I know, I said the same thing.
that's where I was confused.
Yep.
Ellsworth Shopping Plaza.
So just, if I'm reading the costs correctly, just looking at it quickly, most of the options seem to be pretty much the same until you get to the changing the railroad, and that railroad just balloons it to levels that, so is it really a realistic option?
Well, and I guess we haven't got there, but one of the things is there's potential cost savings, I guess you would call it, with having the railroad do some of the work, or a lot of the work, of actually moving the tracks. So,
Which we have not.
we haven't gotten into that with them, or,
I can't imagine they're gonna take that cost on it.
right, I don't know.
Okay,
But yes, they're all in the same.
they would.
This is the screen that you're seeing for those on the Zoom and online here is the matrix of all the alternatives and kind of do they meet what we were looking for, yes or no, and then kind of, more desirable, kind of neutral, less desirable. That gets us to the recommended alternatives, which are 3, 4, 5, 3, 4, 5, and then looking at 2, 3, and 4 for the Main Street to Sunrise Trail section.
Yeah.
And then this is you, right?
Well,
Or
yeah,
you want me to
boy.
keep
it
going?
doesn't matter. This is just a bulleted points of the summary of the estimated cost. So just like, to summarize, from Birch Avenue to Main Street, if we went with the recommended alternatives for the 3 segments, it's somewhere around $300,000 for construction. And it's about roughly $200,000 for preliminary design and engineering. Is that correct, Lisa?
Yep.
So if you take that's like $500,000, let's say, for that first section plus the engineering and design. So you'll see that the costs vary based on the different alternatives, basically just for the Main Street to Sunrise Trail sections. And
Right.
that's what's making the differences between the costs. One thing that we just noted on here is that these estimates don't include costs other than design and engineering and construction. So there could be outlying costs that, such as like right-of-way or land acquisition if we have to go across a certain property. If there's any, like, I believe one of the properties has an outbuilding in the back, if there's any costs to demolish it, it's small, I don't think they would be that high, but, and then any permitting, so if there's any DEP permitting, any permitting at the state level, to move forward with the construction. So, I mean, it gives you a nice rough estimate, but, just kind of wanted to put that note out there.
Is the design engineering cost, does that include the surveying and that's probably required? So that's all part of it?
Yeah, and then drainage and things like that, right?
Yep,
Yeah.
yep.
And just to be clear, Ellsworth's share of this would be 20%.
Right,
Well,
yeah, so
We got another slide.
we're gonna get
there.
there.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll get there.
I didn't want people seeing this to think, Lord, they're gonna spend millions of dollars.
Right,
No.
right.
And
Hey, Mark.
Yes.
20% could be the Blanchette Family Trail you dig in your pocket.
I like it, John. I like where your head's at.
I'll consider it, John.
And then, these three alternatives don't include that crossing, the pedestrian crossing at Merrill Lane and the Ellsworth Shopping Center, which was a rough estimate of about $365,000 for that separately, so.
So, if you left it as you went down and used Spring Street,
yep,
without, just fix up Spring Street, used it for pedestrian, auto, and bicycles, how much was that gonna cost?
So that one's in here.
From Birch Avenue to
So-
Main Street?
so to do our ideal purpose from Birch to Main, right, is only 300,000. That's to do the ideal reconstructing Spring Street to get it to that it's just a shared path along that section of Spring Street, as well as the new section of trail above the rail from Birch to Park. Right?
Yes.
Park. So that, to do all that is 300,000. And then there's additional 200,000 to get the first 500,000, we'll call it. The 200,000 gets us the full construction, the full engineering of both that first section from Birch to Main, as well as the figuring out and designing the section from Main to the Sunrise Trail.
Well, I don't know, maybe I'm not thinking straight here, but what would be the least expensive way to go from Birch Avenue to Main Street? Out of all the options, the very least
Out
expensive
of
way?
the very cheapest would to be leave Spring Street the way it is right now, and just put some signs up and some what they call wayfinding signs, so we tell people walking on the path, just follow this road. And I think, what did they have for that? Did they give us a price for that?
No, I think we only have the summary of the recommended alternatives for the costs.
Right.
So we don't have that. We can ask, and I can bring
Is
that.
there any survey on how many cars use
Yes,
Spring
they did.
Street?
They did do that. I think average daily traffic was like 60 or 80 cars, something like that. ADT, if I remember correctly.
And probably about the same amount of people.
But that would be only on the paved section of Spring Street. There's the two paved sections. There's no way that 60 or 80 cars use Spring from Park Street to Church.
I think from Church to Main Street, a lot of cars use it, right?
Yeah, as a cutoff, I think, to get away from the traffic light.
From Birch to Lincoln Street, well, even to Church Street, probably 10 cars a day,
You know,
if that. So there's not gonna be a lot of hazard
So the other consideration and part of why we undertook this study and looked into this is that a lot of Spring Street is actually within the railroad right-of-way,
Right.
which does not make it a city street. While the city maintains it to some aspect, it's really not our property to maintain. So there was some, for us to go in and redo the road.
And there's also a lot of confusion in many of the property deeds,
Yeah,
who owns it. Some of the houses, or part of the residential properties are within the railroad right-of-way. Railroad has 65 feet right-of-way from here to Kingdom Come. That railroad track can meander any place within that 65 feet. It doesn't necessarily run right down the middle.
Lisa, I remember when we were first starting this, that would there be some cost savings to you from a maintenance standpoint of having to maintain that road by closing it off? Or is it kind of like a equal balance there? Kind of
It's one thing or the other. so,
balances it out.
I mean,
Another
But
thing
you
to,
save it in the fact that that road needs some sort of capital improvement, one way or the other, if it's gonna stay a road or become a path.
yeah, it's, right now, to even use the word road on parts of it is a stretch. Cow path would be more correct.
I mean, the end from Church Street to Main Street is fairly well used. You would have to pave it down to Merrill's anyway, so to go from Merrill's to the Church Street doesn't seem like it would be, and use that part, and then the other pieces where there's only a few cars a day, that wouldn't be a big inconvenience for anybody.
But one of the things that, in my mind, that one has to consider is the safety factor and the economic development factor. People who live and/or work in Ellsworth, or that are moving to Ellsworth, or companies that are moving to Ellsworth, they are also looking for things that their employees can be doing in the off time. And to have a safe walking path for walking, biking, skiing, snowshoeing, depending on the time of year. Running is another thing. To be able to go from Ellsworth Falls to the crossing at Shaw's safely without worrying about any vehicles is just a huge bonus.
There's two places on it that are gonna be the most dangerous crosswalks in the whole city. I mean, at the bridge, where you can't see when you come down over the hill on Church Street, you can't see until you get past the bridge if somebody was coming.
Right, but like the current path now, there are bollards that are put up at the end of the path, with stop signs.
I know, but Church Street's gonna be open.
Yes.
So if you're coming down Church Street and somebody's walking, you're gonna see them like the second they step into the road. And if you're coming down at 25 miles an hour, there's a chance of running somebody over. If you put it on the uphill side, you're going up there at 25, there's a chance of running, you're not gonna be able to see them until the last second.
Well, there's no room on the uphill side because of residential
Yeah.
dwellings. But nothing changes.
And the main street by Angelo's, that's gonna be very, very dangerous.
Getting back to Church Street for a minute, nothing will change. It'll stay the way it is now as far as the line of sight vision. That's one of my walking paths.
Yeah.
And, you just have to stop and look both ways. I mean, it's just common sense that everybody does to safely get across there.
That show all the different signage and everything at the back of this.
Once you see the vehicle on Church, they can see you.
Oh, yeah, it's just
I'm talking about.
people that not really looking for you.
Oh, yeah, I understand. But keep in mind, signs would also be put on Church, above and below the overpass,
Yeah.
the railroad overpass. You know, that there's
I also
a
watched a
path
truck
ahead.
drive under that bridge one day that was obviously 12 feet high, and it said 9 feet, and they didn't pay any attention to that sign, so.
I can't speak to that.
Right, so if you look on, Gene, I think they're on the one that we gave you.
Yeah.
Correct or not, I don't know, I can't see that far, but, at the back of the plan, if you, for those of you who have the full plan, either online or with you, there is, it does show the plan signs and pavement markings and different, you know, bollards and that type of thing that are planned to be used to,
Yeah.
make it as safe as possible. I'm not sure, but you may, and I'd have to talk to Tony on this one. This could potentially be another location where you could use one of those rapid flashing beacons so that the people could push the beacon at Church Street, the Church Street location. They could push the beacon, wait a minute, and then proceed through the intersection. Just to give some additional, safety precautions.
I mean, it's a great idea to have the trail, I just wanna try to make it as least expensive as possible and still have a nice
So
trail.
let's get into the next slide,
Yep.
which will make you maybe, hopefully, a little bit feel better, hopefully. Hopefully.
So just quickly, the Merrill Lane pedestrian crossing,
Yes.
that's not included in any of
No.
these estimates, so it's gonna be 365,000. Who pays for that? Is that 100% city?
So that's the next slide.
Well, we can go
Oh, it
into
is
it.
next one.
Yeah. I have a comment from Nadine Lewis. Should I read it?
Yep.
I would like to thank Mark Blanchette for his forward thinking for the city of Ellsworth to create and provide these recreational, healthy opportunities for the current and future citizens of Ellsworth. All the best, Nadine Lewis.
Thank you.
Okay, again, technical difficulties, sorry. Can't find my cursor.
And if I can jump in here, I got a message, Councilor Miller, I got a message that says, I believe the COA students did a paper on the trail and spoke with the residents about closing Beals, who were largely in favor.
Yes,
Yeah, that's what I thought. This is like the third time I've asked about it in these meetings, so I didn't know it was coming. Thank you.
I got it.
Yep.
that was about 4 years ago. That was here. That was when I was here.
Nate?
Doesn't ring a bell with me, to tell you the truth.
He couldn't take it anymore. He's watching you, he's like, I'm going in there.
I said nothing, okay?
I never said I was an IT expert, okay?
All right.
Okay.
So, next steps, Elena Pikett, city planner, we thought it would be natural for me to speak about the next steps, since I'll be here to assist and relieve with what Jana and Lisa have been doing for this project. So, we've had some preliminary conversations with the DOT about their bicycle and pedestrian grant program. So if that's something that we're interested in pursuing in the near future, we'd be looking at doing that with an application date in August. That could provide up to $400,000 in funding with a $100,000 local match. So if that application is forthcoming, then also looking at potential sources of that match. That we'd be looking pretty far out with that, because with an award in January 22, it would still not be funding construction until 2025. But that could potentially cover the costs for that first section we're talking about from Birch Avenue to Main Street with the preferred alternatives, as well as covering design and engineering for the rest of the project, at least up to the Sunrise Trail, again, the Merrill intersection being separate. Then potentially,
Michelle, we can hear you.
Okay, I just had a couple of questions. How are you planning on delineating? I know that the bike path is supposed to be pretty much either non-motorized bicycles and pedestrians, right?
Yeah, bike ped, yes.
And so the Sunrise Trail also allows ATVs and snowmobiles. So is there going to be a delineation there between allowed on the Sunrise Trail versus the bike ped path?
Yeah, so currently there, if you go on the Sunrise Trail, the ATVs are only allowed up until the LL Bean, and then there's an offshoot into the LL Bean back parking lot, where, the ATVs can turn around. There's a spot for trailers there, as well as over at the Comfort Inn. They have like a little ramp bridge that goes between the back of the LL Bean parking lot and the back of the Comfort Inn parking lot. So currently there's some not so great signage, but there is signage there that basically shows no ATVs beyond this point, and they're supposed to either turn around there or get off. If they do keep going, that's where, it's basically where there's the delineation between crushed stone, concrete, and then it becomes a paved path. So if they don't turn off there because they either neglect the signage or something, it becomes very narrow, and then there's bollards at the side where it intersects with High Street, so it's very difficult to turn around. So as of right now, there is signage there in that location. There is a proper turn off. There is ample room there for them to turn around. So it's already been delineated with when the Sunrise Trail came into Ellsworth, 5 years ago, about-ish.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So anyway, there's that funding available that is a good fit for this and could potentially fund that first section, at least to Main Street, and then potentially, you know, another round from the same program, perhaps for the rest of the project. And we'll continue to look at other sources. So we just wanted to touch on that before we have a general discussion.
Is there currently, because you mentioned the 20%, is there currently a different funding source, or is that?
Nope,
That's what
That's the
this is.
20,
That's the one you're referencing?
yes, the
80-20.
100,000 to 400.
Yeah. So that 300,
Who funds the maintenance of it in perpetuity?
It would then be, I won't say the property of the city, but the property of the city to maintain as far as repaving and such. With the current path, there have been a couple of times where either in a high wind or because of animals, specifically deer trying to jump the fence, they've knocked over sections of it. And it's been our responsibility at our cost to repair that fence.
There's a maintenance agreement from the state DOT that comes with the funding.
Is that a 4-season maintenance plan or a 3-season, or do we have to plow it? And then is there a liability if we do have to plow it? If it's icy, if somebody falls down, if they sue the city, that sort of thing?
I believe going forward, it will be a year-round maintenance agreement.
Yeah, that's what the recreation committee would like.
trails are covered under our insurance policy, I
Right.
believe.
Trails would fall under the same thing as a sidewalk or a road for our liability insurance.
But on the other hand, if you do that, then anyone who wants to use it in the winter for skiing or snowshoeing is gonna be SOL.
They would have to head out to the
Right.
public forest.
The information that was sent to me via the state of Maine, they kept referring to this path, the law that they referred to for maintenance and for plowing in the winter, it kept referring to it as a highway. That was the word they used. And for the life of me, there's got to be somebody in Augusta that has taken the word highway to new definitions. I can't believe that any community that has a path in Maine, whether it's a 10-year-old path or one that may be open this past summer, has ever plowed the length of it. I would be very, very surprised to expect to plow a path is, I believe, would open ourselves up to a lot of liability. If it's plowed, then we're giving a de facto agreement that it's walkable. And Lord knows that because of storms, temperatures, the timing of various weather events, that not everything is always walkable in the winter. It's Maine, we get ice and snow.
So I think that might be one of those areas that we need to investigate to see if the use of, if we intend the use of that to be for winter activities such as skiing, do you then have to maintain it in terms of plowing? Or can you designate it during that time of year for a specific purpose? It'd be worth asking the question. We definitely are going to need to know that one way or the other.
Per the state, from what I've gotten thus far, is that if we go after this grant program, which is federal money, the maintenance agreement that will come along with it will require 4-season maintenance. Whether that's what comes to fruition, that is what I'm being told at this point.
And is there a definition of what that means for maintenance?
Can you groom it?
Can you groom it?
So-
Don't have, if you want to find me a groomer.
I mean, and I'm not asking, you, obviously,
Yeah,
tonight,
well,
but
you
it's a
can look
question
into
that we
it,
need to
yes.
look at
Yes.
to see to the extent, because it goes to the issue Council Blanchett's making around how, to what extent can you meet those requirements?
Right.
I think it's something that can be looked into going forward, yes.
Sure.
Are they going to require us, for example, to salt and sand it and maintain it similar to a sidewalk versus just a path that can be used for snowshoeing and cross-country skiing in the winter and bikeable, walkable in the summer?
I believe they probably have an example of what their maintenance agreement would be for any funding they give out going forward. So I think we could ask for a copy of that ahead of time if we wanted.
Awesome, thank you.
So if the construction can't take place until 2025, when would the city need to obligate the matching funds?
Well, the 2025 for the whole thing.
That's the completion?
No, that's the first section. So we have to obligate the money for the August 2021. When we apply for the grant, we have to have the money obligated already,
Cash in hand.
cash in hand. So in August of 2021, when we turn in the paperwork, we have to have your guys' blessing to spend that money.
Which is why,
Yep.
I'd like to also see the estimates, if we are required to maintain that at, full, just as we would a sidewalk. I'd like to see the annual estimates as to what that would cost on the years going forward, if we have to salt it or sand it, and make sure we're not cutting our nose off to spite our face. I'm sure it'll be much less than the $2 million or the 1.7 or the 300,000 or the 20%, but I'd still like to see what those estimates are going forward.
We can do something with that.
What about, Lisa?
So with the August, so we have to have the local match to go after the grant. And then, no matter what, they're funding projects that are being constructed 5 years out. That's just how, once you're quote unquote awarded the money, it goes into the DOT's 3-year work plan. And then that's how it progresses through the process.
I'd just like to note, now I see where IT spends most of their time.
Fixing stuff for me.
Oh, no, never.
So we really need to, part of this process is we need to make some decisions and include this as part of the budgeting process if we're going to be able to apply for the August. That's what I'm hearing.
How do you like the sidewalk that you did at Harbor Park? You don't have to maintain that in the winter, right? You just leave it. I mean, it does, you don't,
Which
It's
side?
not currently being maintained.
It's
because
not like,
It's not wide enough for our machine.
The federal government.
so I mean,
is
why
not
couldn't you
listening.
just do it so it's, when it's bare, when it's not, you take your own chances, I mean. If somebody walks down to the harbor on the sidewalk right now, they take their own chances, right? I mean, it's not, common
I think
sense
the
plays.
city-
Explain that to a lawyer.
The
Well, I don't
city-
know, I'm just, that's
City
why I
is
asked.
protected under tort law for a lot of those things. So, you know, we do our best to maintain sidewalks, roads, any surfaces that we, parking lots to the
Right,
best
you
of our
don't-
abilities.
You don't usually throw a bunch of salt and sand on the sidewalks, right? You plow them and they,
Oh, no, we put plenty of salt and sand
Oh,
on
do
the
you?
sidewalks. Not to the
And so
level of the
the
road.
question I had was whether or not we had to do that on this trail.
Yeah, so we're gonna look into it, and based on whatever the sample maintenance agreement that they give us, I think Lisa can come up with an estimate of those costs, for you,
Awesome.
for you to take a look at.
And just so you do know, we do already do summer maintenance. So, like for the existing trail, we do mow it a couple times a year. There is,
Bags.
non-hazard, or what do you call it, not non-hazardous, green spraying that happens along there for weeds and such once a year.
Drainage.
Well, we haven't done much with drainage, but we've done fence repairs like Mark talked about. So there is some basic maintenance that we already
Oh, the bollards.
do.
Yes, but for a natural trail, like, you know, the trail, you wouldn't have to do weed spraying or anything like that close to homes and things like that, would you?
For this one.
No, I don't think we would have to. That would be ultimately our decision.
And the recreation committee thought that it would get much more use. Don't forget to turn right then.
Glenn.
My apologies. I just wanted to add that we have to take into consideration that the trail that we currently have is going to need maintenance based on all of this discussion. It's gonna need to be plowed and upkeep, and so that's gonna be an additional cost. And doing the section that we're adding may not be all that cost prohibitive going forward.
When did this all come about, Glenn? When you say maintenance, you mean winter plowing?
Well, yeah, as part of this discussion, we're talking about the need to plow, and what Lisa has uncovered is that the expectation is that we will maintain that trail to ADA acceptable levels, and the trail that we currently have. So as we delve deeper into this conversation about adding length to the trail, the reality is the trail that's existing was supposed to be maintained, and we haven't done it for 10 years.
There's nothing in the contract about that?
Well, I'll let Lisa address the specifics, because she's had the conversations, but my understanding is that it's the expectation of the DOT that those are maintained to an ADA available level.
To expect a community to maintain that to ADA standards in the dead of winter, you stand a better chance of me growing hair tonight. And that's not gonna happen. That's just,
I'm like, are you bald?
that's just,
So let me suggest this on this particular issue. I think there's more research that needs to be done to collect information so that we have facts in front of us and not speculation, especially around something like this. So I think that's something, Lisa, if you can continue to do the
Yeah.
research to find out what we're obligated to do, what we're not, what's permissible, what isn't. It all has to be part of the overall presentation so we understand what we're voting on if we're going to appropriate dollars to this effort. So that's one thing. The other question, and I don't know if this is even worth an idea, but if we approve this, the construction is ways out. And are there other options in terms of, if we get approved for the funding, can we, if we had bonds, or, for example, could we start the construction and use the funding afterwards to pay ourselves back for that, or do you have to wait for the funds to be able to do that? And it's a question to look into, but it may not even be a good idea. It may actually increase the cost, but I'd just be interested in knowing that, because it could move up the timetable to actually have it constructed. But it may not be something that's possible. I just don't know, and it'd be
Yeah.
interesting to have that information.
Yeah, it's definitely worth an ask. I don't know that DOT functions that way, but it's worth an ask. And I do have a copy, and I can distribute it to all the counselors of the email that I received from the Patrick Adams, the head of the Maine Bicycle and Pedestrian Program, regarding maintenance and our previous or existing maintenance agreement with them and what's expected going forward. But I will also see if I can get a copy of a current maintenance agreement that they would send out for any new projects.
So there's like no way you can make it like a pre-season trail, like wintertime it's shut off. Nobody, I don't, I'm just,
We'll have to ask. I mean, I don't,
From the information I'm getting, no, but we can ask again.
All right.
So many other available trails around the area between Bar Harbor, you've got Woodlawn, you've got the Jordan Estates, you know, and those are all available for hiking, or Woodlawn's really good for snowshoeing and for cross-country skiing, you know, and I guess if anybody is brave enough to go biking in the winter, I personally wouldn't, but
done it.
anybody that is, I guess that's what they're looking for. They're looking for a place where they can go biking safely without worrying about roads, without worrying about traffic and things along those lines. And if that's the standard that they expect us to be able to achieve, there's gonna come an annual cost of maintaining that as a four-season facility.
And I think it's all things we can look into, and we can come back with some estimates, and hopefully, I don't want to say negate it, but work it into our process.
And that's
Yeah.
a consequence of accepting federal.
yeah.
Right,
funding
and that's
for it,
it,
right?
this is actually really a federal program, not just a state program, and that's where the ADA compliance comes in more so.
Mm-hmm. That's totally fair.
Do we have any more screens?
No, oh, it's just my son.
Oh yeah, we gotta look at that one. There's like, there we go.
Happy.
So I think for the community, especially since we're potentially looking at this to fund in this budget, it'll be important to hear from the community. And I think it's also important to understand, especially if we're talking 2025, this really is about, there's an economic development aspect, there's quality of life in the city and how that contributes or doesn't contribute to people choosing to be here. And we've seen the research around that and interest, so I think that's part of the whole discussion, is to understand how this trail and extending it impacts on those issues and the cost benefit of doing that. So I hope we hear from the community in terms of their thoughts about this.
I would just add to that, that it also would hopefully relieve some of unnecessary traffic on some of our streets potentially, especially in the summertime when we've got gridlock jams, and so, I don't know, walk or ride your bike instead of taking your vehicle, and you could still safely end up in a commercial corridor to do your business, rather than having to take your vehicle, so, just to add to that.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you mentioned the gridlock traffic, because usually between 3 and 5 o'clock, you know, if you're coming from, let's say you go to Walgreens, and you go up, you know, you go up Water Street, you get to Walgreens and you wanna get back. Well, there's no way you're gonna get back down Water Street because of the traffic, you know it's really a long line. So a lot of times what we'll do is we'll leave Walgreens, we'll go up, cut up Beale Street, go down Beale Street, go up to Spring Street, go all the way to Church Street and come back and take advantage of the light and making a right-hand turn. And I'm not the only person that does that, a lot of people do. So there is that consideration that your rush hour traffic in the afternoon will be taking advantage of that shortcut, and will that shortcut be cut off?
One of the other key things I know I heard from some of the citizens is a positive for this path is schools. So there's currently, as we all know, no sidewalks along Oak Street. This would connect a large amount of town with a safe path for children to walk to school. And so I think that is also a huge potential benefit of this path.
Can I ask a question for Ben?
Yes?
I wanted to talk about the Beals Avenue section, and how come it crosses over Beals Avenue on options 1 and 2, but doesn't cross back over the tracks at Beals Avenue, crosses over Beals Avenue and then crosses the tracks. Why not take advantage of the road that's there and use that as the crossing over point instead of crossing over Beals Avenue and then crossing the tracks?
I think that was based on whether or not we close Beals Avenue. So I think if we close it, you could essentially put it there. If it stays open to traffic, vehicular traffic, I think it was idea of kind of separating the vehicles crossing it with the personnel crossing it.
And so basically what you're saying is that the people on Beals Avenue who currently live there will only have one way in and one way out of their road? It'll be
If-
like a circle at the end?
Yeah, like a cul-de-sac.
Right, it'd be
or-
like a cul-de-sac if the decision was made to quote-unquote close Beals Avenue, yes.
Well, there goes my shortcut, but that's all right. I can live with it.
Yeah, but you lose your shortcut, they gain a nice quiet neighborhood.
And increase their property values.
I know, right?
Dale, we have another comment. Again, from Nadine Lewis, says, I look forward to hearing more about the requirements going forward, but I think that the counselors should tread carefully when discussing and making comments about ADA requirements and possibilities. There are many disabled people in and around Ellsworth, including myself. Thank you, Nadine Lewis.
Nadine, what I was talking about is trying to make that trail ADA compatible in the wintertime. The rest of the year, certainly, it should be built to ADA standards. But because of weather in the winter, meeting those standards could be very, very tough.
Are the poles at the end wide enough for wheelchairs to pass through?
Yes.
Yes.
How about the plow?
And they pivot down so that we can get the tractors and the plow and potential for fire too. So if somebody gets hurt in the middle of the path, they can.
Oh, so they go down.
The fire
Now,
department has the
If a
ability
person in a wheelchair
to.
approaches an intersection with the poles up, is there a button that they can push so that the poles could come down so that they could cross safely, or
No.
are they just wide enough apart that a wheelchair can fit but not much else?
That's pretty much it.
They're pretty
You can't get a 4x4 between them. I know that because I helped a young man unwedge his 4x4 back 7 or 8 years ago.
Okay.
And Nadine, I don't know what comment you were referring to, but I would just say that I think the discussion, at least from my perspective, is just understanding what the requirements are and being really clear about that before we start a project, because there's a lot to it. It's not just the width and the plowing. It's also the grade, the steep, all of that, that is related to it too, which we need to know that to understand the full scope of it. So that's the nature of the exploration, is to get all the facts and data on the front end so we know what we're doing and the direction we're going and the full expense.
There's one more comment from Sugar Mags Candy. The biggest thing that really needs to be considered is that none of the sidewalks and streets are ADA compliant at all. It is physically impossible to walk from Water Street to Main Street in any direction at night or in the morning with a child in a stroller, which is the same as somebody in a wheelchair, she says.
What street were they trying to walk on?
You said Main Street to Water Street.
Water Street to
Is
Main.
there an issue with the ramps, or we can discuss that at another time, but that's a valid point.
I can forward it to you so you can take a look at it. I'll forward it to Dale so that if you want to address it at another time.
I think that'd be good, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for all the work you've done on it. So far, I know that the committee's done a lot of work and walked the trail or the area that's going to be the potential site for the trail several times, so thank you.
Yeah, and people can continue to email questions or comments, and we can make sure that the council gets them too.
Perfect. Anything else on video? Anybody else? All right, we will adjourn this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.